Welcome to the Chronicles of the Phoenix.
Phoenix!
Woo. Today we have an amazing topic. We think you're gonna love it. I know I'm gonna love it.
I'm definitely going to love it.
We're gonna talk about healing through humor. What does that mean exactly?
What does it mean?
It means we're gonna talk about how transformative we think that humor can be in healing, especially in just your everyday life, but also when you deal with a lot of trauma. We have a background of working around people who are managing a lot of other people's trauma when we were supporting therapists, and also have that background ourselves, but also trauma is everywhere. So I feel like no matter what we're doing around people who have to deal with some pretty heavy stuff. So today we're going to dive into things like the science behind laughter and the role of humor in high-stress professions like first responders, healthcare workers, therapists, and even look a little bit at how dark humor can be a lifeline for us. So, I have some questions for you,
Okay.
in case you're wondering.
Bring it on.
We might be silly in this episode because it's talking about humor, and there's just no way to talk about humor without laughing a little. But I feel like when you're used to dealing with a lot of really heavy stuff, right? There's a lot of ways that we cope naturally with that. There's a lot of ways that we find, the best way. Like we've talked in other episodes about how to like move through things and move towards difficult things. And to me, one of the antidotes in there, the ways that we do that, is through laughter and humor. So I'm curious if you've ever had a moment where you feel like humor was able to completely shift the energy in a tough situation.
Definitely. I'm an energy person, and I can kind of feel tension in a room. So when I've been in meetings and have felt the angst or tension, I've definitely used my humor to diffuse the situation and try to shift the energy as a tool, which has often resulted in a reset and then a more productive meeting was able to be had after the fact.
And so what about on a personal level? Do you feel like there is a space where humor can help shift difficult things on an individual level as well?
I feel like one thing that comedians will tell you is that they get funnier and funnier the more traumatic their life becomes.
Yeah, and I feel like there's a reason for that.
Right.
Because it's protective, because it's adaptive, and we'll talk a little bit about the brain and how humor works there. I think they do say that.
Mm-hmm. And they use their life as fodder for their comedy, and often laugh at themselves as a way to shield, to your point, their emotion, like it's a protection. So I absolutely think it can become a distractor, and I've certainly absolutely used it as a way to protect myself and move through.
Yeah. And I think, like we talked about in previous episodes, this idea that, no emotion will last forever. And I think when we are in a really dark place, or we're supporting people who are going through really difficult situations, or we find ourselves hearing about trauma day after day after day, or in this case, when we're talking about, like first responders, people who work in the ER who just see horrendous things and very scary things every day, war veterans, right? Like just any of these experiences where you have a lot of exposure to stuff that anyone human probably isn't totally like set up to be able to manage on their own. There's a really nice adaptive way that humor comes into play to just help almost balance off or level set like the experience of the dark, difficult stuff that they're faced with every day.
Yeah, I mean, I think about like memorials and funerals when family members get together and start talking about like the old stories and sharing like all the ridiculousness that happened, and people start laughing, and it becomes a connector.
Yeah.
And celebration of the person that is gone, and I think it becomes a healing part of the day, actually. I mean, what we know, though, to be true is that laughter reduces cortisol, which is the stress hormone. It boosts endorphins and improves immune function. Humor increases resilience and emotional regulation. So it really is important to bring that in because it creates resiliency.
Mm-hmm.
There was a study in the Frontiers in Psychology in 2021 that stated that humor therapy actually reduces anxiety and depression.
Very cool.
Which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. And then I think we also were reading that the Mayo Clinic reports that laughter strengthens relationships and enhances coping mechanisms.
Which just made me feel like naturally smarter because I feel like I just naturally like to bring humor and laughter into situations. So I'm like, dang, I've just always been onto something.
You have. There's a reason it's there. There's a reason it works. But it's true. And I think that, as we continue to not only reflect on the work we've done in the past where we had opportunity to work with many people who were therapists hearing trauma day in and day out, and as we also are supporting the growth of other leaders, now in our business as well, one of the foundational things that we find to be important is this idea of humor and play, things that just sort of lighten things up a little bit, build connection. And part of that is because I think so much of what we're doing all the time does carry a lot of weight, whether it is, dealing with heavy things, whether it's the stress and pressure of your job and what you're dealing with day in and day out, that building in that space for, like this is saying, like having a way to sort of manage that negativity, that difficult experience is vital to be able to survive in what we're doing.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think people underestimate the science behind humor and feel like it's a distraction when it's actually doing real emotional work? Like, I feel like there might, especially the dark humor that I feel like is important. I think that there are some people that may not understand it, especially people that aren't in the helping fields. What are your thoughts on that?
I definitely think that people underestimate the actual factual scientific data that is clearly showing the benefit of humor in healing and in processing through difficult material, difficult information. I think many people can become uncomfortable with silliness. I think in general, play is uncomfortable for a subset of people.
Yeah.
And maybe many professionals find play and humor to be, I think there is sort of a old historical idea of what professionalism looks like, and that as a result, humor, play, fun isn't in that definition, when what we know is actually the complete opposite, that when we have space to allow ourselves to shift in our thinking, allow our brains to access something completely different, it actually has a real healing component. And that's what science has told us.
Not even just a healing component, but a productive component. There's a lot of research that shows that if you allow space for play and connectivity, your productivity will go up. And your outcomes will improve.
Right.
So as a manager and a leader, it actually benefits you to allow play in the workplace and humor.
Yep.
And that silliness that you expressed. I think you brought up a good point when you talk about kind of, and in some ways I feel like it's a generational gap in terms of the understanding of professional environment versus and what maybe one generation expected of conduct in the workplace versus not. And how do you create safety in a culture and allow for play, especially with some of the first responders and therapists who are dealing with really, really heavy content like sexual abuse, physical violence, that some of that content that they're talking about is going to be dark.
I think that's the piece of where the real human nature in this is important to be able to factor in and balance, right? That the work can be so heavy, right? So I think a piece of what you're talking about with that is there's been a ton of research done on dark humor as well, especially in settings like for EMTs or in a job like that, you burn out. You can't get by day to day without having some levity. And you also get so exposed to things that are dark that I feel like the level of humor also kind of goes hand in hand with that. So I think creating a space for that, especially in certain fields, also helps build the team cohesion. It helps the team connect with one another and recognize that we can be here for one another, support one another, and play together a little bit. Like, this doesn't have to only be a serious space for us, because it's already so heavy that if we don't balance it off, we're going to burn out or not be able to stay in the field that we might have intended to stay in for our career.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Is there a line between helpful and harmful, do you think?
I think that for me personally, understanding humor as for what it is, which is bringing this healing component to sort of the work that we're doing, or even a like engaging in play in a way that we know is productive and actually helps us become better at what we're doing. Viewing it from that lens, I think, helps shape what that humor and play can look like. I think, much like anything, there are some lines with like that humor not turning into a bullying, poking fun at kind of thing to anybody, right? I think there are some worlds in which, that group of EMTs that's together and having like some kind of laughs together, but in a dark humor kind of way, is going to be very different than if that turns on kind of picking on someone for being a coward in a situation. That's very different. That's not humor. And that's not what we're talking about here. So I guess that's more what I'm thinking in terms of definition, is sort of what humor encompasses and what that healing aspect of humor can encompass. But I'm curious what you think about that line.
I think I completely agree with what you're saying, and I also think, to your point, the content of what you kind of joke about is relative to what your world is and what you're working within. So as long as it stays connected to that and never personalized to the people and really neutral and objective, I think it can be a way to desensitize you to really hard stuff. Because I think if you aren't able to discharge the really, really painful, horrific visual things that are in your brain that you see in the field every day, if you're an EMT, a nurse, a doctor, or if you're a therapist, that you're in and you're sitting in the therapy room and you're intaking all of the painful stories that your clients are sharing with you. If you're a teacher and you're encountering students that are food insecure and are sharing challenging family stories, and like, everybody has different things that they're holding that are really hard throughout their lives. And if you're not able to find ways that are removed from the situation, that aren't hurting anyone, and I think there are some comedians that cross the line and that are just mean, and I don't like those comedians, and I remove myself from them. But there are others that I think are just funny, and they're really dark, and like, they use foul language and, sexual content at times, but, they do it in a way that is neutral. It doesn't hurt anyone. And it's, I think, funny.
And I think some of the funniest comedy is comedy that's based in reality, like challenging social norms. It's, like, there's just so many aspects to it. And I think it comes from a place of like, there's so much pressure, and the world is a pretty rough place sometimes, especially now. And I think having a space to be able to, I think of it even now in our political climate, and you look at some of the political satire that's out there, and to me, it helps. It makes a difference. Like, it kind of it doesn't take away the heaviness and the negativity fully of what's going on. But it also, in my mind, helps bring motivation to not feeling so defeated and helpless in it, but it just kind of flips it on its end and looks at it from a standpoint that almost is like, this is kind of laughable, because even when it's really heavy and hard, like, some of it is absolutely absurd and laughable.
Well, yeah, sometimes it's the only way I like to intake my news, because it's like, it does show the absurdity and it helps. And like you said, it makes it less scary.
Yeah.
Watching in that form, which is what cartoons always did back in the day.
100%. And that's it. Like because our nervous systems are bombarded all the time, right? So when you think of the theme here with people who are quite literally bombarded with trauma and traumatic experiences, and either being witness to that, hearing that, right? Our nervous system is constantly having to protect itself and deal with what we're seeing and kind of push things to the side. And so much of what we've also talked about is how important it is to face things in order to move through them. And so I think humor is a way that allows us to sort of digest and kind of take in what we're experiencing, where we don't just sit in the space of avoidance and, never acknowledge the pain of things. But, I'd imagine that in some of these roles, and I've experienced this as a therapist, that, when you hear a lot of difficult stuff, a lot of heavy trauma, an important piece of the work is being able to acknowledge how hard that actually is. And I think an avenue to do that is to also have a space where we can lighten it up here and there to help us move through it. I know you've spent many years in leadership, supporting people in their journeys and in their work. So I was curious how you have created space for others to experience humor and play in their work.
Yeah, and I feel like that was one of the things that we used to do, is we would go from being serious, and then we could read the room and be like, okay, pause. We're going to need to do a round of musical chairs.
Mm-hmm.
We would do a round of musical chairs, and then we would go serious again.
Yep.
And we could pivot from that, and it just allowed connection, but it also allowed people to be able to then connect to their pain, or to learn, if that was what it, depending on what the space was and what we were doing. But certainly in a learning environment, musical chairs allowed people to like take a break from a really heavy content and then be like, okay, I'm ready. I can attend to learning again.
Yeah, that movement, like the play, the fun, the music, like it was just, No, I think that's a beautiful example of how leaders can also look at that and really recognize the importance of this in their workplaces and find a productive way, right? Because just like you're saying, it increases productivity. If we're able to get through difficult material and learn new things, and we get to a place where we're overwhelmed or we've just absorbed way too much and we need that break, when you come back to it, you're more effective. You're more able to take things in, right? It's the same thing we know about learning in kids in school, right? We need those breaks and spaces for play and getting out of whatever our head is sucked into in that moment.
Adult recess should really become a thing.
Even my middle schooler is like devastated that there's no recess, and it doesn't make sense to kids, as they transition away from that time into middle school, and then it's just gone, and they don't see, gym every other day. It's the same thing, because it's not the same thing. It's not
free time.
It's not, and it's not that imaginative space that my middle schooler still goes to, like it's still valuable for him to have that space to just like be in his head in a different way and in a different world. And so I think humor is a door to that too. So answer me this. Do you ever feel judged for using humor in your work?
For sure. As an Enneagram 7, I certainly use humor a lot to be a distractor sometimes. When there's a lot of tension in a space, I might infuse humor into the room, and sometimes that's not necessarily valued or appreciated by some leaders that don't necessarily find me funny. I think most people find me funny, but some people don't like the timing, maybe, of my placement of humor. So, yeah, for sure. There's times that I've felt judged for my humor.
And in that same way, what advice would you give somebody who, I would say both, potentially does feel judged for being in that position, who believes, just like you do, that this is a valuable piece of the work, but is struggling with feeling that judgment, or somebody who's feeling guilty for kind of bringing that in and maybe kind of being uncertain about it afterwards?
So I have two things, right? So one is humility.
Mm-hmm.
There have been times where I feel that my timing was absolutely right and that my intervention was needed,
Mm-hmm.
and the majority of the feedback I got was positive. And so I could step into that and put aside the maybe one negative feedback that I got and kind of own that. I've also misstepped at times and
We all do.
missed the mark and 100% decided to be a goofball when I should not have done that fake fall. And
One fake fall too many.
Maybe one fake fall too many, or maybe I dramatized it a little too much and like really convinced someone that I was injured and I wasn't, and it was upsetting. You know, like there were there's sometimes my acting gets the best of me and I take it too far. Like, so I have to be humble and know that there are times that I have to apologize and learn from that, and recognize time and place is an important piece of that. With that though, I also feel like living in alignment, as we've talked about in our other podcasts, is really important. So I recognized as cultures were shifting, in my previous place of employment, the playfulness and silliness wasn't really as accepted as it once was throughout my career. And it wasn't aligned anymore for me to necessarily stay there. One part of my decision in leaving was that I think the judgment would have increased further had I stayed. And I really see the value in play. I believe in the research and the science behind it. And I want to live with intention and with my values and be aligned with who I am. So I chose for a lot of reasons, but that was one of the reasons that I decided to leave. So I would say if you're feeling judged for where you are, and that you can't be your authentic self, you maybe would want to take stock of that. Maybe that isn't the right place for you.
If we're feeling judged or in some regard carrying guilt for showing up authentically, that ultimately, right, we can't control what anyone else is doing. And so if people pass judgment, like we can't stop people from passing judgment. Right. We can't change people's perspectives fully, and we can try to, but we have no guarantee that that's going to happen. So what we do have control over is determining whether what we're currently doing is working for us.
Right.
And in this arena, it feels like, just like you're saying, the research, the science behind the usefulness of this in fields where the work is so taxing, it's not aligned for you, and similarly for me to have to move away from that as part of a healing coping mechanism. I think that a lot of people could use.
Yeah.
And it's a big part of the reason why I want to bring that to other businesses and fields where it could be useful, and you could find a way to build it in to keep teams cohesive and building psychological safety on teams. I think that is so important, and there's a whole, we could do a whole episode on that and like building psychological safety in a group and in a team. But I believe that humor and play is a huge part of that.
100% agree. Yep.
Yeah.
And I am excited to be able to share that with other agencies, and businesses in Connecticut.
Yeah. We're ready.
We're ready. Do you think humor can be a form of self-compassion, like laughing at yourself is actually a way of being kind to yourself?
I do. I think, when I think of laughing at yourself, right, I think There's like the stereotypical scenario of like I do something embarrassing and then I like laugh because people are laughing, but I like laugh with them. And I think as much as that feels like a silly scenario, we picture ourselves like in the cafeteria as kids, you know, like, oh, I better laugh too. But I think that exists because of this, for this reason, that it actually is protective in some ways to manage our emotions through humor sometimes.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we avoid every difficult emotion because it actually isn't. That's not what's happening. I think that's what all the science is showing us. But it shows how I believe I see it as like a protective factor in a situation. So when we can laugh at ourselves, when we can kind of like you're talking about with humility, it goes hand in hand to me that you can assess yourself from a different vantage point almost, not necessarily take everything that you're bringing to a situation in such a serious way. I think humor allows us to distance ourselves a little bit from like our own narrative and see it from a different lens almost. And then we can make choice in how we go forward with some of that, right? If we're having a certain feeling or, you know, just like the question you asked about self-compassion too, like I think it does allow us to build self-compassion because we're not in the judgmental headspace all the time. Like, you know, it is back to the cafeteria example, like it's embarrassing in those moments because we judge ourselves too. And we are in our own head and we then assume that if people laugh, it's because they're laughing at us and we should be embarrassed. But at the end of the day, those experiences, like that negativity that we hold sometimes for ourselves, I think gets very heavy as well. And so building in the capacity to shift our thinking, shift our narrative, see ourselves differently, lighten things up a little bit, I think it just makes room for that narrative to change and be less heavy.
Totally. I think maybe, I don't know if this is true, but maybe that's why I became an incredibly good fake faller. Because like maybe the first time I fell, I was a little bit embarrassed and judgmental, but then I was like, if I learn how to fall and tuck and roll, then when I do trip, I just naturally trip, roll, fall.
Like Willy Wonka.
Yes.
You freaked everyone out.
And then you're like, but then you're like, I'm okay, I got this.
Yeah.
And you just laugh.
Yeah.
I am like the most dramatic faller, as you know.
It's a sight to see. If we ever get a good video to share somehow with our listeners, we can find a way to do that.
I also am a very dramatic sneezer, but that's like a family trait.
Okay.
My mom is too, but my son often says that it's a fake sneeze, but it's not.
Oh.
Sometimes I'll make it a little bit more dramatic just for effect.
This is perfect. This is good. All right. I like it.
Yeah. That was a good answer, though.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. I had the chance to share how I have used humor in my leadership in the past. Do you have a story you'd like to share?
Yeah, I do actually. As you know, but I'm not sure everybody knows. I spent some time as a leader, as a part of an executive leadership team with you, which was awesome to get to do. But in that role, as many might imagine, if you've ever been in a role like that, and this was at a nonprofit, so the financial stressors and just the pressure of the many hats that you wear in that type of setting, as one might imagine, meetings can be very heavy.
Yeah.
There can be a lot going on. Often you're discussing really difficult topics. And so I do remember this day where we were having a meeting and we were discussing some really heavy stuff about budget cuts and, you know, whether we can retain certain positions that we had. And it's a lot. And, you know, we're constantly shape-shifting and trying to solve problems for $0. And we became really skilled at figuring things out and problem solving. But in those moments, those conversations are just very hard and taxing.
Yeah.
And we loved humor. And so
we do.
We do still. But in that time, it was imperative to survive the role to be able to have humor as a part of everything. So our team wasn't totally unfamiliar to it. But in that moment, I remember just the team was kind of disconnected and checked out and just sitting heavy with everything. And I had been gifted a lovely pair of tiny hands by you.
Yeah, you were.
And if I think everyone can picture what I mean, tiny little plastic hands. And so I chose in that moment to take out my tiny hands, which I had been carrying with me to work every day since I received them for the right moment.
Waiting for the right just comedic moment.
I was. And that's one of the things I like to do is you just got to wait for the good timing. So I waited for this moment and I pulled out my tiny hands and I tucked my hands into my sleeves and I chose to pick up my breakfast sandwich with those tiny hands and eat it in the middle of the meeting. And it definitely got some laughs.
I'm pretty sure I looked over not knowing where you were like wrestling with this like breakfast sandwich, very gingerly holding it with your plastic tiny hands.
Yes.
And I might have fallen out of my chair laughing so hard. It was epic.
And so, yeah, I feel like it was so necessary.
Yeah.
But to bring it back to, our topic at hand here, no pun intended. It's
played.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's important to remember that even when our jobs are really hard and topics can be really challenging and overwhelming for everybody, there's still room, and I believe there should be room in any work setting for there to be some levity and some humor.
If I recall that meeting, I think that moment was fun and hilarious, but then it also did result in like it connected us, it brought us all together, and then it brought the energy up.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were able to have a super productive meeting after that where we just got stuff done. And brainstorming, like it shifted the whole dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
So it was not only hilarious, and I think my stomach hurt from laughing so hard, which is a great ab workout. So there was multiple benefits to it, but it also increased our productivity. And the outcome of the meeting was more successful than I think it otherwise would have had you not timed those tiny hands as you did. So I was grateful.
I'm so glad.
Yes.
That's just one example of what people could consider doing in their meetings.
Exactly.
For some fun.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Of course. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
I think this brings us to the end.
It does. It's been a nice journey.
It has been. So what do we have for a wrap up today?
Well, we are so grateful for our listeners. And since this is new and we're a work in progress, we've been receiving some feedback, all very positive, and we're grateful. But one of the pieces of feedback that we got from a listener was that they would love some key takeaways and reflections going forward. So we're going to pivot the way we end going forward.
We love a good pivot.
We love a good pivot.
Mm-hmm.
We're flexible here. So keep the feedback coming. We would love to continue to evolve and improve as we go.
Mm-hmm.
And so our reflections for today are: humor makes space for healing. Dark humor can be empathic and protective, and laughter connects us.
Well said.
Thank you.
We also have a little challenge for everybody. So if you listen to this podcast today and you want to participate, we'd love for you to, as Erin said, send us feedback, comments. But the challenge for today is to find one moment and laugh, even if it's just through your tears, through something really hard, and just share it with somebody else. We'd love it if you share it with us, so you can comment on this episode and tell us what you laughed at or what got you to have a little break and get into that space, even if it's been a heavy day. So that will be our challenge.
Yeah. And according to my mom, who tried to leave us a review, you have to be very, very creative with, if you don't already have a name, with your handle. Otherwise, it will keep rejecting you.
That is wild.
I know. Mm-hmm.
I bet I know what platform that is.
Your least favorite one?
Kid. But yes, please send it. Be persistent. Be persistent. Make up a funny name. We would love that. That could be part of your humor.
It could be.
That sounds great.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good tip too.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Love it.
And thanks, Grammy.
Well, that's us. Thank you so much for listening today, and we will see you next time.
See you next time.